Thank you, Presiding Officer. Tens of thousands of people work in Scotland's North Sea oil and gas sector. It raises billions of pounds to support public services, and it's crucial for Scotland's economy. But this week, across the Atlantic in the United States, Humza Yousaf said that Scotland will no longer be the oil and gas capital of Europe. So why has the SNP turned sour on Scotland's oil and gas?
Deputy First Minister.
Well, we, of course, are committed to a just transition for the oil workers in the North East, and I want to pay tribute to the sector and indeed the workforce for the over £400 billion that they have generated for the UK coffers, much of it, of course, squandered. But, of course, we are committed to a just transition because we know that the unlimited extraction of fossil fuels is not consistent with Scotland's ambitious climate obligations, and we have to ensure a planned and fair transition that leaves no one behind. But I think Douglas Ross is very brave going on this subject today, in a week where his Prime Minister, Rishi Sunak, has essentially pulled the rug from under the net zero ambitions, not just of the UK, but potentially damaging the net zero ambitions of Scotland. And that doesn't just damage the environment, Presiding Officer, it damages jobs into the process, and he should be ashamed to stand side by side with Rishi Sunak on that matter.
Douglas Ross.
What a predictable response from the Deputy First Minister, because the SNP love to talk a good game but keep missing their own climate change targets. And the Deputy First Minister wants to pay tribute to oil and gas workers in the North Sea.
Let's hear one another, please.
The Deputy First Minister wants to pay tribute to the oil and gas workers, and Humza Yousaf wants to take their job away. What we need is a transition sensibly to create new energy jobs, not by throwing away the current ones. It's not a choice between oil or renewables. We need to support both. That's why Humza Yousaf's proposals are so reckless. A recent report from the Robert Gordon University warned that the rapid decline in the oil and gas sector will cost tens of thousands of jobs. So can I ask the Deputy First Minister, why is the SNP backing a cliff-edge scenario where skilled jobs will be lost for good?
Deputy First Minister.
Well, of course, it was just a year ago that Douglas Ross was urging us to follow Liz Truss over the cliff edge of her economic catastrophe for our country. That same Douglas Ross now comes to the chamber today wanting us to follow Rishi Sunak off the same cliff edge of reneging and backsliding on net zero targets. And of course, it's no surprise that one of the first people out of the stocks to support Rishi Sunak was Liz Truss herself. So that is the company that Douglas Ross is keeping. Of course, we are committed to a just transition for Scotland's energy sector. And of course, we only just missed our target by 1.2%, which of course shows that we are not far behind.
Deputy First Minister, if I may ask you just for a moment. I'm finding it difficult to hear. I think members are being somewhat robust in their engagement with responses, and I would be grateful if we could hear one another speak. Deputy First Minister.
Thanks. So I've never allowed a man to shout me down in my life. I won't make any exception for Douglas Ross, Presiding Officer. But our targets are world leading, and that's why the First Minister is in New York for the UN Climate Change Week, because we are world leading and we have a First Minister whose ambitions are to meet the net zero target, showing leadership, unlike the Prime Minister who is ditching net zero targets. And if he doesn't want to listen to me on that, all he needs to do is to listen to the condemnation from industry, from business and indeed from Tory MPs themselves.
Douglas Ross.
Let's just go through a few of those points. The Deputy First Minister saying the SNP government's targets are world-leading. They're not meeting them. 8 out of the last 12 years, they failed to meet their own world-leading targets. And let's listen to industry. Jaguar Land Rover said the plans from the Prime Minister were pragmatic and brings the UK in line with other nations, which we welcome. But Presiding Officer, this is not just about what's best for our economy. It's also about what's best for our environment. Industry experts have found that new fields at Cambo and Rosebank would save 17 million tonnes of CO2 compared to foreign imports. More production in Scotland is cheaper, greener and protects jobs. But Humza Yousaf no longer wants Scotland to be Europe's capital on oil and gas, and he's against the UK Government granting new North Sea licences. So can I just ask the Deputy First Minister, why wouldn't we use our energy on our doorstep instead of costly foreign imports?
Deputy First Minister.
Well, of course, we've been very clear about any new licences and the climate targets that they have to meet in terms of the analysis of those. They have to be robust. And of course, it's not us that will grant any new licences, but the First Minister and the Cabinet Secretary have been very, very clear about those climate compatibility tests. But let's get back to the nub of this, because when Douglas Ross talks about our net zero targets, the changes and announcements made by Rishi Sunak make it harder for us to achieve our net zero targets, and that is bad for the environment. It's also bad for business. Listen to Lisa Brankin, the chair of Ford UK, what she said. Our business needs three things from the UK Government: ambition, commitment and consistency. A relaxation of 2030 would undermine all three. The former Siemens UK CEO, Jürgen Meyer: it's just chaos, isn't it? It beggars belief. Everybody is now sitting, wobbling and wondering, and I can tell you what, they won't be investing in the UK. It's a disaster for productivity, a disaster for jobs, well-paid jobs, and it's a disaster for business confidence and investment. And we need exactly the opposite. When is Douglas Ross going to grow a backbone and support the net zero targets rather than his Prime Minister?
Thank you. And Douglas Ross.
Well, we can trade different quotes all day. You know, I can quote Toyota, who said today's government announcement is welcome as it provides the clarity industry has been asking, and recognising that all low-emission and affordable technologies can have a role to play in a pragmatic vehicle transition. And of course, we had...
Mr Ross, if you could just give me a moment. Mr Robertson, could I ask you please to remain silent when we're trying to hear Mr Ross's response? Douglas Ross.
Angus Robertson's shouting didn't put me off when I beat him in 2017, and it doesn't put me off now. And I also have to say it was quite something for Shona Robison to blame yesterday's announcement by the Prime Minister for the SNP failing to meet their targets in 8 years out of the last 12. Now, let's go back to where it all began. The SNP slogan used to be, "It's Scotland's oil." Now it's just "Stop Oil." Humza Yousaf flew to New York, to the finance capital of the world, to tell people, don't invest in our oil and gas sector. The First Minister of Scotland is talking Scotland down. It's a slap in the face to North East workers. It's naive because we still rely on oil and gas, and it would be a hammer blow to Scotland's economy. So why is the SNP giving up on Scotland's crucial oil and gas sector?
Deputy First Minister.
Well, no one's giving up on Scotland's oil, but it has been squandered by successive UK governments of all political colours. As I said at the beginning of my answer, we absolutely respect and appreciate the efforts made by the oil and gas sector and their workforce, and we support a just transition that we have put serious money into making happen, unlike the UK Tory government. But listen to what the oil and gas industry are saying. Emma Pinchbeck, the CEO of Energy UK: sudden changes to policies and targets like this are damaging to the very investment we need to fund the move towards net zero and jeopardise the economic benefits and opportunities this transformation could bring in terms of jobs, growth and greater prosperity to all parts of the country. Business needs certainty and stability when making long-term investments worth billions of pounds. Presiding Officer, the announcements by Rishi Sunak undermine all of that, not just for the UK, but for Scotland. And Douglas Ross, standing shoulder to shoulder with Rishi Sunak, will not be forgiven by the people of Scotland.